story of the SS Empress of Canada. Now, before we get into this video, this ship is fictional, so don't go in the comments saying it's not real. I completely made it up. Anyways, let's continue. Her story begins in 1907, before the ship was even built, when Cunard Line launched their Lusitania and Mauritania. White Star Line and Red Rose Line were both falling behind. Red Rose Line is fictional too, as White Star Line's largest ship was only the Oceanic, and Red Rose Line's largest ship was only the Pacific Star. And when White Star Line built their Olympic, Red Rose Line was the most fallen behind, shipping company. They didn't have a ship near the size of this. So they, of course, decided to build a ship around the size of the Mauritania. But of course they never actually got the size that they wanted. It was much smaller, but it was still luxurious. And after the launch of the Britannic, the race was on. She was designed, but due to World War I starting, her hull wasn't laid down until 1919, and she was launched in 1921. And her fitting out process took 1 year, meaning she finally entered service in 1922. And on March 23rd, 1922, she set off on her maiden voyage. Her life was very successful, attracting the rich and the famous. In 1941, she was laid up due to fear of German submarines sinking her. But in 1942, she was converted into a troop ship and renamed USS Armel Castle. She served as a troop ship, carrying thousands of troops across the Atlantic for around 2 years before her first incident happened. In 1943, she collided with a smaller vessel, immediately sinking it. The USS Armel Castle survived the collision and picked up the passengers who survived the collision. And she continued to serve as a troop ship throughout the war. In the war, she was nearly sunk many times, but always survived, except for one time. In 1945, a terrorist attack is made on the USS Armel Castle, killing many of the troops, as only 37 troops survived, and only 125 crew members survived, which was almost all of the crew members. On 1945, a couple months later, after World War II had ended, the USS Armel Castle was offered back to the Red Rose Line. Red Rose Line accepted, and they had to tow the USS Armel Castle back to a port, which was very hard, because they had to keep the ship afloat with all those giant holes in it and tow it back to a harbor. And she was set into a dry dock and was ready to be converted back to a passenger ship. And she was given back her title, Empress of Canada. After this, though, she was much larger and much different to her original design, but she did enter back in passenger service. The Empress of Canada would be floated out and re-enter service. And after being renovated, the Empress of Canada re-entered service as the flagship of the company, being much larger than her original design and Red Rose Line's other ships, now living up to what they wanted it to be, larger than the Mauritania. Empress of Canada would be very successful, now being the largest ship in the world, just larger than the Normandy and Queen Mary, but just by a little bit. Meaning once they come out with more ships, Empress of Canada might just be too small again. But Red Rose Line currently wasn't afraid of that happening. And the Empress of Canada would also serve to help the Baltic Star as she sank, picking up all the survivors after she collided with another ship. But in 1987, Red Rose Line's Empress of Canada became outdated and started losing popularity, and it was then that Red Rose Line agreed to sell the Empress of Canada to Costa Cruises, who renamed the ship Costa Dream, the ship being much more luxurious and much more up-to-date. Costa Dream would serve for Costa for many years, being a very successful cruise ship. But in 2005, Costa makes a surprising move. They agree to sell the Dream to Disney, who renovates the ship and renames it the Disney Beauty. This would all change when the Disney Dream was launched. The Disney Dream and so many other Disney cruise ships had been so much larger and so much more luxurious than the Disney Beauty. And Disney finds the Beauty to be too costly to keep, and she is eventually sold for scrap. And the Disney Beauty is finally scrapped alongside many other ships. And that finally brings us to the end of the story of the SS Empress of Canada.